I recently did a video on the best way to prepare a steak. My old school way of seasoning it, then adding it right to a hot pan with oil versus the newer school reverse sear method. Pre-season, a slow oven cook up to temperature, and then pan searing. And to my surprise, the reverse sear was infinitely better. In fact, it wasn't even close. But the second I put out this video, everyone said, you need to put the reverse sear procedure up against sous vide. Well, that day is today. Let's get right into it. Sound good? Let's cook. And just like in my other comparison, I still feel like the New York strip is going to be the best cut of beef to do this test with. A ribeye steak is loaded with fat and flavor. It's going to be delicious no matter how we cook it. The New York strip, it is leaner, but it still does have a good amount of intermuscular fat, or as us old school guys call it, marbling, and it has a wonderful fat cap around the outside, which is going to provide as much flavor as we need. What we're gonna do for both procedures is pre-salt it and let it sit in the refrigerator for up to 24 hours.
Both New York strip steaks that I'm going to be testing are about 1 pound and pasture raised. We're transferring it over to a rack over a sheet tray lined with parchment paper, and what we want to do is pat it down very well on both sides with a paper towel. Remember, moisture is the enemy of that beautiful brown seared up crust we want to achieve. Now I'm just going to generously season it with coarse salt on both sides, and when seasoning anything, be about a foot away from what you are seasoning. This way you can cover as much surface area as possible, ensuring every bite is absolutely delicious. And the main reason we pre-season this is because as it sits over time, the salt penetrates deep down into the steak so that the center is beautifully seasoned just as well as the outside. And in addition, it will help retain moisture, making it juicy and flavorful. And when doing this method, you want to ensure your steak is at least 1 inch thick. Once they are seasoned, we are placing them in the refrigerator uncovered for as little as 2 hours and all the way up to 24 hours. And just to see this procedure in action, I'm going to pull the steak out of the refrigerator after 1 hour. You can see the moisture collect on the outside of the steak. That's what it will do. It will draw it out, and then over more time, it will soak back in, seasoning the steak completely throughout. Okay, back to the fridge. I let these steaks pre-season overnight for about 16-17 hours. They look fantastic and they're perfectly dried out on the outside, which again is going to make for a beautiful sear.
And in regards to letting steak sit at room temperature for 1 hour before cooking it, sure. If that's what you do and have always done, then do it. When it comes to cooking, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. However, I've actually had the opportunity to test this myself on a 1 pound steak, and it only rose another 10 or 11 degrees. And to me, that's not worth it. And because of it, I'm not going to do it. I'd rather put that time into the reverse sear or even the sous vide cooking process. And that's what we're going to start with right now.
You can use a large 8-quart pot like this one, or even just a plastic container. That's what I'm going to use so that I can show you perfectly with the camera what it looks like at every step. Whichever you decide to use, just be sure it's filled about 3/4 of the way with water. I'm just going to briefly set this to the side, and then let's talk about our sous vide device for 1 second. The most common home version is a wand just like this. Now you can pick them up for as cheap as $50 on Amazon, or you can go the commercial route and spend thousands of dollars. One thing you should do is make sure there is a screen on there so that you can adjust and see the temperatures according to how you want to prepare it. And if you've never used one of these before, you simply fix it to the container or pot, and there usually is some sort of clamp or device where you can screw it on to fix it to the side to ensure that it remains firm to the pot or container. Now I'm just going to turn it on, and then you can see that it shows the water temperature and then the desired temperature of what I want the water to be. Me, I'm going down to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll explain why it's at this temperature in just a little bit. And as soon as the temperature is set, you'll start to see the water moving around and warming up, which only takes a couple of minutes to get to temperature. And now to prepare the steak for this water bath, I'm going to generously season it on both sides with freshly cracked black pepper. And then what I'm going to do is add it to a large vacuum sealed bag. Then I'm just going to slightly adjust it to make sure it's at the bottom part of this bag. Now this is what I love about this process. I'm going to add in 3 to 4 sprigs of fresh thyme and 4 garlic cloves. The beauty of sous vide is being able to infuse flavors into whatever it is you're cooking so that it becomes much more delicious. And you know me, I'm all about garlic and herbs. And next, you're just going to need to vacuum seal this until airtight.
And Comies, I realize that not everybody has a vacuum sealer, so instead, here's a great option.
Add your steak to a large 1-gallon plastic zip bag, put it towards the bottom just like in the other one, then add in the thyme and garlic cloves and submerge it completely in the water with the bag still open at the top. And while the steak is under the pressure under the water, you'll see that the bag will suction right to the cut of beef. Then last but not least, just zip up the top and let it sous vide. Now, whether you are using the plastic zip bag or even the vacuum sealed bag, just completely submerge it in the water at that 100-degree temperature. And this is how it works. The wand regulates the water to a precise temperature and it holds it at that temperature. There's a heater in the wand and a little fan that blows to constantly circulate the water to ensure it stays to temp. And throughout this process, the fat in the steak will begin to slowly melt and then render throughout the steak, making it extremely flavorful while retaining an incredible amount of moisture to keep it juicy. And just in case you're wondering where it gets its name from, sous vide translates from French to English as under vacuum. And that's exactly what we're doing, cooking under a vacuum.
Now you can cook this for as little as 1 hour and then all the way up to 2 hours. Anything longer than that, you're kind of in that danger zone where bacteria really starts to grow, and well, that's how foodborne illnesses happen. But the beautiful thing about the sous vide wand is that it will hold this temperature all day long. There's virtually no way you can overcook this steak. All right, let's get started on our reverse sear.
I'm going to preheat my oven to 200 degrees, fan off so no convection. Then to prepare the steak, I'm just going to make sure it's centered for even cooking. And then just like the other one, I'm going to generously season it on both sides with freshly cracked black pepper. And then I'm going to insert a thermometer to make sure I know exactly what temperature it is internally and to remove it from the oven so that it doesn't overcook. So I'm adding it to a center rack in that oven at 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's going to take roughly 1 hour or until it reaches 100 degrees Fahrenheit internally. Then once it hits that mark, I'm going to remove it. You can see it's nice and dried out. It's not the most beautiful steak. It started to turn color a little bit, but I promise you, this process is well worth it. Let's also be sure to remove our sous vide steak. It's been sitting in there for a total of 1 hour and 20 minutes. I'm going to take it out of the bag and make sure I remove any of the herbs and garlic. And one thing that absolutely stands out is that the sous vide steak has obviously been sitting in its own moisture with nowhere to drain. So using a paper towel, I want to make sure I pat it dry very well on both sides. Again, we want to get that brown crust. Sure hope that's still achievable.
Now, the main reason I pull the steak out at 100 degrees Fahrenheit is because I like a really rare to medium rare steak, which ends up being about 125 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, there are a lot of folks that pull out their steak from sous vide or reverse sear in the oven at about 110 or 115. Now that only leaves about 10 or 15 degrees to play with while pan searing, and you can overcook that in seconds. Plus, you may not get a great brown crust on there. For me, I'm not willing to take that gamble, so that's why I pull it out at this temperature. All right, it's time to sear these.
Now, I was always taught to sear steak in either a cast iron skillet or a carbon steel. They get hot and they stay hot. Let's cook the reverse seared steak for the first one. I'm going to be using a 10-inch cast iron skillet over high heat, and then I'm going to add in 1 tablespoon of olive oil.
And one more real quick thing. Before you start busting on me, I tested this ad nauseum between a high smoke point oil like avocado oil and olive oil. And I still find and prefer that olive oil has a richer, more buttery flavor to it. Plus, it's still got a great smoke point of 400 degrees Fahrenheit. However, if you love avocado oil, then I absolutely want you to use it.
Once the oil begins to smoke just like this, it's perfect time to start searing. While securing the steak with tongs, I'm going to put it fat cap side down and cook it like this for about 1 minute to help render out some of that fat from that cap, as well as brown it up for more delicious flavor. Then after that amount of time, let's just have a look. Nice, beautiful brown outside. We're going to lay the steak flat. Then we're going to turn the heat from high down to medium-high, medium-ish temperature. And we're going to let it sit untouched for exactly 1 minute. And we want to make sure we get that beautiful brown crust on here. This is also known as the Maillard reaction, which is a chemical reaction between amino acids and reducing sugars and proteins, which is caused by heat and will give it that much more flavor. So after 1 minute, let's come back and have a look. You see there are some little gray areas on there. Here's a great chef technique I've picked up over the years to get it beautifully browned everywhere. For the next 1 minute exactly, move the steak around the pan just like this. See how much more that crust has accelerated because of this? If there are still a few other spots, we'll get it through basting. Once you flip it over, turn the heat from medium-high down to low-medium and let it sit for exactly 1 minute untouched. Then after that amount of time, I'm going to push the steak to one side of the pan, and in the other, I'm going to add in 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter, 4 garlic cloves, 1 shallot, and 10 to 12 sprigs of fresh thyme. The butter will immediately start to melt and brown up and become foamy. That's exactly what we want. We are going to take the next 2 minutes to baste this steak, which will help add all those flavors from the herbs, garlic, and shallot, as well as that brown butter to further enhance the overall taste of this steak. This is well worth it. Do not skip this process. Once you've basted the steak for those 2 minutes, let's remove it from the heat, and we're going to add it over a rack on a sheet tray lined with parchment paper to let it rest and cool down. The rack is essential to prevent it from having too much carryover cooking, allowing the heat to release from all sides. And I always like to add all the goodies from the pan on there too. Hey, more flavor. And for the sous vide steak, we are going to cook it in the exact same manner that I cooked the reverse sear steak in, using the same times, basting techniques. This time though, I'm going to cook it in a carbon steel pan. And when we're done, we're going to rest it on the same rack for 3 to 4 minutes with all the herbs and garlic on top.
Both the steaks look fantastic, and the smell in here, oh, the smell in here is so good. They have that beautiful brown Maillard crust on each of them on both sides. They both feel very similar as well. They're nice and tight. You can tell they're jam-packed with juices. That's the magic of pre-seasoning the steak. All right, I can't wait any longer. Let's slice these up and try them out.
Let's first slice our reverse seared steak in half. And if you're wondering what those 2 holes are, those are just from the thermometer, no big deal. And one thing I've had to learn over the last few years of cooking reverse seared steaks is that even though I tempt it to 125 degrees Fahrenheit, it still takes several seconds for that myoglobin, which is the protein responsible for making meat red, rush back through. So at first it's going to seem like it's a little bit overcooked, but I promise you it's not. Then for the sous vide steak, a nice flip at that beautiful temperature right away, looks fantastic, and it seems to be a little bit more plump than that oven reverse seared steak. And then because I was always taught to finish off proteins veg with clean acid and butter, I've still got that same maitre d' butter that I used in my other comparison steak video. So I'm going to take some thin slices because y'all hollered at me so bad that there was too much butter on it last time, and we're going to lay it right on top of those steaks. And as they continue to rest for a few more seconds, they're going to soak in all those delicious buttery lemon flavors.
Now, both these steaks look absolutely fantastic, as you can see, but one thing that jumps out right away to me is the sous vide steak is more at that perfect medium rare temperature that I like. You got a bit more red in there. Also, it's like plumper, it's bigger, it's sticking up higher, which is interesting. So without further ado, let's take a bite. And because you all pounded on me last time, what kind of bite is that? That's a little wimpy cut. So let me take a good cut, okay? A good amount, all right? You can see me chomp in. Just how I remember it. Juicy, flavorful, tender. Oh, the butter on the top, you gotta do it. For the sous vide, yeah, it just looks better. The temperature's right on. It's funny because once you try the reverse sear, you're like, yeah, that's what could be better than that. The sous vide is more tender, for sure. That first bite, it is fantastic. And it's probably just goes back, obviously, to that sous vide being able to hold temperature. Now, I've cooked both these things multiple times. I just never had an opportunity to put them together until now. And honestly, if I had to choose, the sous vide is just right on. I would be ecstatic though if I got either of these at a restaurant. They're incredibly flavorful, still juicy, tender, but I'm gonna go over to the sous vide. It's just that much more tender, that much more flavorful, that much more juicy. So I think that's a winner as far as this one's concerned. One thing is for certain, you should definitely go to billyparisi.com and grab this maitre d' butter. It just makes the steak sing. Also, if you're just a huge beef fan, my reverse seared smoked picanha steak is just, it's awesome. I've got a great recipe video. I'll see you on there.